No matter how much we prepare for success at work, things keep changing. And the truth is, it will continue to be. This is the reality that Erica Vogel, our guest today, noticed as she continued her career throughout her life. Even though she was really interested in marine biology and, in fact, wanted to be a professional illustrator and animator and pursue careers at Marvel and all that jazz, she quickly realized that maybe she can use her passion for design and connecting the dots in a different way and dove into many different paths and careers that led her to now being the senior product manager in the world of financial technology. You see, 20 plus years, one thing that she found consistently is whether it's design, strategy, or product management, and having worked in many of the top companies, is that the best growth happens when you are willing to reinvent yourself and be adaptive to the changing environment. She's had to do it professionally multiple times as she moved up the ladder of different careers and different journeys she had, and not let what, quote, quote, what you've done just for your undergraduate be the defining thing that you do professionally for life, as well as her personal. And in fact, this reinventing, the courage to continue to adapt, and this particular skill of reinventing herself was something that she found particularly important for her personal journey too. You see, Erica Vogel is a queer transgender woman. She has gone through a transition 2.5 years ago, but she has always felt something was off throughout her life. Even with all the successful professional growth, something was off. And it was about time that she said, you know what, I gotta do something about this. And as she has finally stepped into her full identity, she realized how much more liberating it is, both to innovate and also to show up fully as herself. So as she looks back at her entire career and her personal journey and how she had to constantly adapt and reinvent herself, she shares an important message that all innovators could relate, that reinventing takes time and courage and curiosity. So whether you are here to learn more of how you can reinvent yourself or learn how you can also be a better ally to transgender women and men, or yourself going through a transition and want to have inspiration, you're in for the right place. So meet Erica, who's ready to share her journey with you today. So very excited to have Erica here on the show. Erica, thank you so much for joining us. Very excited as we continue to celebrate Pride Month, celebrating innovator stories, and so excited to have you on the show. A little shout out to Jen, who made the introduction to have Erica here. So very grateful to make that direct. So let's dive right in. Erica, you have worked in different places as especially the role of product manager. And I'm curious, like when you were young though, is that something that you wanted to do? Or is there something else that you wanted to do as a child when you were growing up? Because I don't think we knew product manager way back then.
No, that is, it's quite an interesting story. So when I was young, I remember wanting to be like a marine biologist all the way into like middle school. I loved, dolphins and whales, and I read about all of that all the time, and a lot of my friends were into it too, so it was like, oh, we're all going to be marine biologists, right? That was the deal. But prior to this time, I had started drawing every day. I love to draw. Huge fan of comic books. My friends were drawing, so I taught myself how to draw, how to illustrate. And as I went through middle school, right, I was like, maybe I don't like science enough to do this, but I do love to draw. I do love illustration. I could not get enough of my art classes at school. My mom enrolled me in the performing arts. High school had like a Saturday program for like middle school kids. So I learned like puppetry and a lot of like drawing and everything. So as I got to high school, I was really invested in that. And I was fortunate to have a graphic design class in high school. And by the way, I'm an older gal, so this was like 1988, 89. And shout out to Taylor Swift, 1989. Sorry about that. And so in this graphic design class, I was really exposed to the world of designing posters and logos and things like that. And I really fell in love with like old school travel posters from like the 30s, 40s, and 50s. That's sort of my favorite genre of art. And so the plan became like, hey, I love reading comic books from big companies. I'm going to go to art school and go to work for Marvel or DC or something drawing comic books, right? And that was the plan. And I was exposed to quite a few other things in school as well. My father is an audio engineer and does a lot of videography. So I grew up being around recording studios and soundboards and big events. So I also had that percolating in the back of my mind because I love audio. But I just really kept coming back to, I love to draw. That's what I want to do every day for the rest of my life. So I go off to design school and I do pretty well, right? I investigate illustration, sculpture, photography. Photography is my second love. But as I realized in school, it's like, hey, you're pretty good, but you're not that good, right? So I realized that a job at Marvel or DC drawing comics was not in the cards, but I really fell in love with the idea of designing, brochures, websites, books. Well, there weren't really websites at the time yet, right? But all forms of media. And we were just sort of coming into the digital media world. So when I left university, I forced my way into the graphic design world, working for advertising companies as initially an illustrator, but then became like a Photoshop pro. And over a period of many years, like I think the first website that I worked on was in 1998.
Oh,
right?
wow.
And this was actually for a business, right? I remember this very well. There was this gal who came to the advertising company who was selling solid gold golf tees. It's crazy.
Serious?
Yeah, no, totally serious. To various people in the business, and they really loved them. So she decided to create an entire website around it. So it was my job to create this website. So it's like called the Golden Tee or something. So that was the first website I built, and it was a really fascinating experience. And I was like, oh, now this is a viable art form. I've always loved technology. I've always been an early adopter. I could focus on web development since I'm not doing as much illustration. So I dived into that for a few years, but I wound up working for an international home decor fabric company at one point as the marketing director for the US. This company's based out of Germany, right?
Whoa.
So that got me into high fashion photo shoots and having to do all of the photo editing that comes out of that, planning the marketing materials, and having to go to companies like Veranda or Better Homes and Garden and present our line every year. So it's only after that I wound up jumping wholly into digital design, right? Wow. And at the time, we still don't have what we would call a product manager, right? That comes along much later.
Yeah.
So from there, I got to work for Staples for several years, running one of their business units, doing all of their website design and building out their catalog. I had their first Amazon store that was wildly successful. I think I increased profits like 1,500% in 1 year off of that. And then from there, I go to Wells Fargo, right? Big, retail bank in the US. And that's where I get exposed to product management, even though I'm still kind of working in the design world, right? I become a product strategist there, and there I'm working on the retail banking app. So like if you use banking on your mobile phone, that's what I was designing and building products around. So I launched their first iteration of Touch ID, and then Face ID. I launched their various AI chatbots. I built their security tower, how you change all your preferences, how you connect Wells Fargo to third-party data providers like Intuit. Like I did all of that work. So when I left that job, I wanted to be fully in product. Then I went to Capital One, right, where I was working as a product manager, and I worked in data with ML and AI initiatives there. And since then, I've come to Kforce, working for a bank that Walmart owns, and we're modernizing. So that's my journey from wanting to be a marine biologist to illustrator to product manager.
What? I mean, I feel like you've cut through all my questions that I was going to ask, but
I know, I'm sorry.
No, Erica, I love that you've shared it, because I think when we look at somebody's life and chapter like that, I think it feels like in retrospect, it's easy, right? It's like, okay, let me tell you my full journey. But I bet, Erica, when you were in each of those moments, did you had that clarity and like knew where it was heading. And like
No.
what, so then what helped you? Because I think that's part of the secret of like what
Yeah.
helps innovators know somehow you kind of always found a way that was different and you paved that path. What helped you?
Yeah. So for me, I have always been willing to reinvent myself, right? I'm very physically living that these days, right? But as a child, I always got invested in new things and was willing to try out something entirely new, whether it was getting deeply invested in playing soccer and going all the way through college, or teaching myself to draw, or like I said, learning about marine biology, or just whatever was fascinating to me. And as I got into the business world, coming in effectively to business in the late 90s, early 2000s, so much was changing, right? The job that I do today did not exist, didn't have this name, it pretty much didn't exist. At the time, being a digital designer was relatively new. You couldn't even get a college degree in that like you can today. We didn't use software in college very much at that point, a little bit, right? So I found myself throughout my career looking at, have I outgrown my job? Have I outgrown this company? Have I gone
Wow.
is it supporting me and my vision?
Yeah.
Am I supporting it? Am I giving back as much as it's giving me? And what I've run across 4 times now is that while I loved what I was doing, it doesn't take me to where I now see I want to go. So I've made 4, even though it doesn't sound like it, there's been like 4 career pivots that have happened in this, from
Wow.
moving from being a frontline designer to, a high level product manager is a drastic swing, because in the middle of that, I also did front end coding for websites. So I had to learn code, which
Oh
I
my God.
hated, right? I learned to be a Photoshop pro, which is an entirely different skill set than being an illustrator or a graphic designer. Like when you're doing high fashion photographs, you have to like go over every dang inch of that photograph and make sure it is exactly the way you want it. So what I kept running to is I kept hitting these barriers. There was like, I'm not advancing anymore. I'm not doing what I want to do. I also found myself in front of clients more and more and more. So I was exposed to leadership. I was exposed to thought leadership. I was exposed to bringing about ideas, not just for me on paper, but for a whole team. And it was that ability to think critically about where I am and where I want to go that really gets me to where I am today. Because like I said, I very easily can decide that now's the time to make a pivot to something else, because I have the vision to see what I need to do to get there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's so important because nowadays in careers, like we look at the title, I'm like, geez, like I wonder
Yeah.
how this person did it. But you're reminding us that there's constant adaptation. I'm curious for you, when
Yeah.
did you first know that was a skill that was important for you as a
Mm-hmm.
professional and as an innovator?
Okay. So this could be an interesting one, because it ties into, I think, what we're going to hit later on in this discussion. My status as a trans person, right? So I've always had a lot of emotional intelligence. I've always had this ability to talk to people and draw out what's important. As a designer, you have to understand what your client wants. You have to know where they're trying to get so that you can bring about their vision as opposed to your vision, right? You need to have a vision for them, right? And in that process, I realized that I had a real gift for talking to people. And it was that being able to be emotionally present, to be sort of soft and listen. And these are skills that I was lauded for in my life, especially as when the world thought I was banned. They're like, wow, you don't, it's so easy to talk to you. You're so great to talk to. You're just so friendly and warm and welcoming. I'm like, well, I have a little secret I haven't told you. Um, and that has served me so well throughout my life, right? Because it made me stand out as a leader originally. And it turns out that it's just a core part of my being, that sort of softer, feminine energy, right? And without that skill, I would still be probably pushing pixels around on a computer, wondering what I'm doing with my life, right? Sort of stuck at the lower echelons and feeling like all I'm doing is bringing about what other people's visions that I don't feel connected to. So it was that empathy that I have that allowed me to connect to people, which drove my career.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, it's so key to realize the roles, the wheres might be different, but the who will
Yeah.
continue to grow if
Yeah.
we have and take the time to get that clarity of what
Yeah.
is my strength, regardless of where I go. And I think it's
Hmm.
so inspiring to hear how you've tapped into that early on to find a way how you kind of like repurpose and continue to adapt in all
Yeah.
these different chapters.
Yeah.
While we revisit some of the professional chapters, I'm going to piggyback on your hint and where we touch upon your personal chapters as we
Yeah.
celebrate, of course, Pride Month. Folks might be wondering if they're listening, they might not catch all the details of, I mean, they might have heard from the introduction that I said at the beginning of the
Maybe.
conversation, but your full journey into being a transgender woman. So, would
Yeah.
love if you're willing to share, because I know you've shared some other fun facts growing up as a child of gay fathers, and how you
Hmm.
came out also very early, which I think is very special. Not a lot of people get to recognize
Hmm.
their identity and have that confidence and feel safe early on. So, curious if you
Yeah.
can bring back to your childhood how it was like.
Yeah, for sure. So it's been a real evolution for me, right? My father came out of the closet when I was 3. My parents split up at that point. And we, I was living in Atlanta. That's where I'm from. And we moved to Florida with my dad. My mom kind of went off and did her own thing for 3 or 4 years. And we saw her occasionally. Because she's also sort of a wild hippie flower child. So she's like, great, I'll just go do my own thing for a while. And even then at that young age, it took me a while to figure out who my father was, right? I noticed that he had a lot of male friends that hung around and they seemed really nice and friendly. It was when we wound up moving back to Atlanta and I moved in with my mom that I really was old enough to get the picture. By this point, I'm 7 or 8, right? But I don't have a memory of my parents together in a relationship because I was too young. My brother does, who's 4 years older than me, but I don't. And so growing up, I became quickly aware that my father was gay, especially when we moved back to Atlanta, and he moved his partner in with him, who I think of as like a second dad to me growing up, right? And when I would spend times at his house at the weekend, we would, there would be drag queens there, right? Because that's big in the Atlanta community, even for the 80s, right? But having grown up watching my father come through the gay panic of the 80s and the AIDS crisis of the 80s and 90s and survive that whole and healthy, thankfully, I was exposed to the idea quite young that, well, being heterosexual isn't something that's has to be that way if you don't feel that way, right? Obviously, it's not a choice, right? But I came up knowing that I was likely bisexual, right? And so I was out to myself quite early. I didn't really make it known to my friends, but all my friends know who my dad was, so they inferred it anyways, right? They're like, "Well, we know who Erica is," and so having known that my whole life, but I also started to come to the realization that I wasn't a girl by the age of 5, right? So this is a really interesting story. I was going to, of all things, the Southern Baptist Christian pre-K, um, and it took me a while to figure out that though I liked playing with the girls, no one thought that I was a girl. I thought I was, right? And so the story that how this really comes to my attention was, for some reason, my dad moved me from that school to a Catholic private school, which is a weird choice for him to make, but he did. And when we arrived at school, I remember thinking, Dad, why am I not wearing the right uniform? Right? Because we know what a Catholic schoolgirl looks like, right? She typically got the pleated plaid
Yeah,
dress on, and
yeah.
I didn't. And he's like,
Mm.
what are you talking about? I'm like, why aren't I dressed like the girls? He's like, you're not a girl. And that was kind of the
Oh.
first realization that I was like, oh, okay.
Mm.
And that sort of comes with me through the rest of my life. Being part of the Southern Baptist Church, when this would sort of leak out, because things like this don't stay inside. We get identified young as being different in some way. I was taught shame around it. I was taught that it was a sin, right? So it stayed repressed for a long time. But as I came into my teenagerhood, it's like coming up again. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? I'm in the high school and I think I'm probably bi, and now I'm dealing with this. It was quite a crisis. So I like shoved it down again. And at the time, there's not really good representation of what trans people are like out in the world. We don't even have good representation of gay and lesbian people in the world at that point too,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that you're like, oh, I need to not talk about this. So it's been there on and off throughout my life, right? And I've done a lot of work on myself. I've been through tons of therapy to try to solve this problem of being trans, though at the time we didn't have words for that, right? And so that led me to do a lot of self-investigative work, a lot of work that involves me. And it's only in the last several years that I finally decided, like, now's the time to come out as my full self instead of just the part that some people know, right? And it was causing me tons of distress, right? It's anxiety, depression, right? I also had like a really bad back injury at the time, which I was in the worst pain in my life for like 4 months.
Yeah.
And interesting, a lot of people that go through some sort of traumatic event find that propels them going forward because they're sort of evaluating what they've done with their life.
Wow.
So yeah, I came out and started my transition about, 2.5 years ago. It's truly been the best decision I've ever made. I'm the happiest I've ever been. I am the most authentic version of myself, the best version of myself that I have been pursuing my whole life. So I've gone through this process with the community, with the broader LGBTQ community, where I grew up within the community, where I had great representation in the community, where I had friends in the community. But feeling safe enough to be out as trans took me getting to a point of stability in my life. Like, I had financial stability. I had job security. I had a partner that was able to support, be there and support me. I lived in the right place. I lived in a big liberal city that made it very easy. I had access to resources because for me, losing the stability with transition was like a no-go, a non-starter. Right. And that's kind of something that happens for a lot of people. For those of us who wait later in life, that's typically the issues. We feel like there's too much at risk, right? Those of us that are able to transition earlier, it's usually other factors like that feeling of transness is so strong, it's undeniable, and it's causing you a lot of pain. It must happen now.
Thank you, Erica, for sharing that. And piggybacking on some of the details, when you say 2.5 years ago, is that 2.5 years ago from this year?
Yeah. Where are we?
So during the
2024?
pandemic.
Yeah. Coming out of the pandemic. I'm one of those pandemic trans babies. That's a real thing.
Wow. You shared what helped you know it was the right timing. But even when those are aligned, one could still pause. What helped you know, okay, maybe now is the time?
Yeah. Okay. For years, I've been able to push it back down, right? To just disassociate from it, push it down. Maybe it comes up as a curiosity and I'm like, oh, here's that thing again, but I'm okay. I'm safe. Like, it doesn't have to happen. Like, I can deal with this and just move on. And that worked on and off for quite a while, right? And so I thought I really had it beat. At the end of the day, that's what I was chasing most of my life, is getting rid of this issue. But coming out of that back injury, it really set off tons of anxiety and depression because, one of the things that came out of that was I went through like every medical test you can go through because it was like rapid onset.
Yeah.
It was the worst pain I've experienced every day of my life for 4 months straight. So we were even looking into cancer, and that really scared me.
That is
right?
scary, yeah.
And even though things worked out with a bunch of physical therapy and I'm about 75% back to where I was before, it just wouldn't go away after that, right? That's a big thing that happens in the community, mainly because our fear of lack of acceptance, our fear of accessibility to resources, our fear of being unloved or losing our jobs prevents many of us to turn that pain further inside, right? So as I started to communicate with my partner about that worry, we were both like, okay, that's it. We gotta move forward. We can't, this is like too much. And at the same time, I also have a daughter who's trans, who really struggled with this fact. She came out before me. So we had this experience already. And so I think for both of us, it was like, not going forward is not worth it. And so that's really to be totally honest, that what leads to today. If I don't have that depression, that anxiety, I don't know that I would do it.
Wow. In an ironic way, when we felt like we were at the edge, it pushed us to say, you know what? Fine, I'm going to figure out how to flag that.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, it's an interesting point because I've hit that type of moment before in my life with quite a few of the things that I've been through is than knowing that I can get through anything.
Mm-mm.
I can survive anything. I've learned that lesson so many times that now, pardon me, now I am much more willing to trust my gut and be like, okay, we can get through this. It's not going to be fun. It might not be pretty. It might not be easy, but you've seen yourself get through some really hard stuff throughout your life. So we can do this.
For folks who's learning about this for the first time, if you don't mind sharing a little bit more kind of on the background perspective, how long does the preparation process work? How long does the
Oh,
surgical process work? And how long does it really take? You've already hinted that it takes a little bit more time to get used to it as well. I'm curious if you don't mind giving some timeline to
yeah,
understand how we can be a better supporter for those who might be going through that
right.
transition too.
So I think the first thing to understand
Yeah.
is that nobody's transition is the same. Right? There's a wide swath of options. Some people
Very good
transition
point.
socially, right? So they might change their name, they might change their pronouns, they might change the way they dress, and that for them is perfect. Some people might take the next step of a legal transition where they legally change their name, they legally change their birth certificate if they can. They take those steps to legalize that process. And then there's really the third category that most people assume is transition, and that's medical intervention, right? And the way it works today, and this is really dependent on the state that you live in and certainly on the country you live in, but since we're in the US, I'm going to talk about the US.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And access to medical care is driven at the state level, right? We've seen, if you've paid attention at all, we've seen a wide swath of anti-trans legislation across the United States, something like, I think in the last 3 years, over 1,000 laws trying to be passed.
gosh.
Many of them have been blocked. Right? Preventing us from access to the care that, frankly, many men or women have, right? Gender affirming care applies to cisgendered men and women, right? Like if you have breast augmentation, that's gender affirming care for women. If you are going through menopause and you want to stay on hormones, that's gender affirming care for women. Those same hormones are applied to me. Right? So my first step was that I talked to a therapist that specialized in trans therapy, and she just really helped me get through my own fear of going forward. There are a few steps where her interaction are required, right? So I happen to live in a state in Virginia where we have informed consent. So all I have to do is go to the doctor and talk to them. I don't need to bring a therapist along. I don't have to have a letter for that. And if they agree with my statement that, yes, I am a trans woman, then they can prescribe me hormones. Right. And so I went to a trans clinic in the DC area, which is where I live, and work with a specialist after having worked with my therapist. Right. And they put me on a course of hormone therapy. And we started with something quite low dose. Right. Because I was really unsure about how this was going to go. I was really quite scared of this step. Right.
Anyone would be. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. You're totally changing out the hormones. So but within 2 weeks, something amazing happened. I'd always had this sort of static, this sort of buzz in the back of my brain that was always in the way. It disappeared. So my brain started working it was running on the right chemicals finally.
Amazing.
Right. And so let me diverge for a second. There's a couple of studies that back up that the brains of trans people are more similar to the brains of the cis people that they align themselves to. So trans women's brains are closer to women's brains than men's brains. And there's been a couple studies on this, and there needs to be more, but there's enough evidence there to sort of lead us to the idea that we're actually a little bit different, right? And so for me, getting my brain running on the right chemicals was really the main thing that I needed. So I've been doing that for 2.5 years at this point. So I have a weekly injection of estrogen that I give myself. I take progesterone daily because that has other beneficial effects for me. But sort of the next phase that we have are the variety of surgeries that people can have. So I think when we talk about the community at large, we have to understand that there are people that want different things, some that go all the way, that have every surgery, that do everything, and that's what they need to feel whole in themselves. And some people like me only need some things, right? So it depends on how you feel about your gender. And if you have any discomfort with various pieces of your anatomy, I don't have tons of discomfort at this point. So to me, taking that next step is not something I'm going to do at this point, because that needs to be driven by something I want instead of something I should do. That's my personal opinion. So again, we're not a monolith. We're There's lots of different ways to express and be. And
Yeah.
when we think of trans people, we tend to think of them binary, right? So we think of trans men and
Mm.
trans women, but there are a lot of non-binary people in the middle that also have their own
Okay.
care, right? So we can't just force people to the ends. There's a whole spectrum.
Well, what's something for folks who might be listening who is perhaps going through that transition right now and hearing this story as an encouragement to know their voice matters? What would you want them to know first?
Oh, yeah. I think the thing that I say all the time is just keep going, right? It's a process to fully go through all the options. If you picked every option in transition that you could take that were applicable to you, it's a 3-year process, right? And that's here in the United States in a state that's friendly, right? It can be quite a bit longer. If we're talking about England, it's quite a bit longer than that. It can be 10 years. So it's like, keep going, keep pursuing your authenticity, keep checking in with yourself and doing the work to become more of who you are. It's incredibly worth it.
And for those who want to be better allies, learning about this, whether first time or, deepening their learning now, what would you want to share with them?
Oh, well, we've hit on some of it already, but I think the biggest thing is to remember that trans people are, like I said, that we're not a monolith. We're not all the same, right? Everybody's a little bit different. Just as in your expression of your womanhood is different than maybe your mother's expression, or if you had a sister or your friends, it's a little bit different. We're the same, right? My expression, my sense of my womanhood and my femininity is different than other trans women, and it's different than other cis women. And in some ways it aligns, right? So understand that we don't have to perform femininity even more than you do or less. Or if you're transmasculine, we don't have to perform masculinity any more or less than masculine people do, right? So understand that there's a whole spectrum. I think when we're talking about any marginalized community, right, we don't go to that community and ask them to answer all of our questions for us, right? We work to get educated,
Exactly.
right? So there's plenty of books to read, a great website if you want to get grounded in the nuts and bolts, especially of the medical aspect, because I know that's what everybody's interested in, is the Gender Dysphoria Bible, right? You can just search for that. It will be the first thing that comes up, and it talks you through the process for trans women and trans men, the things that change. It's quite fascinating because it has a lot of medical information in there, but it's very approachable. But it also covers like the mental state. It covers the changes that will happen. How, for example, trans women will not necessarily experience more emotions than they did when the world thought they were men, but they'll experience like a higher volume of emotion. So while it used to be quite hard for me to cry, I will cry at a commercial today. Right? That's the effect of estrogen in my system. So that's a great resource for people to check out. I think PFLAG is another great resource. It's parents of it's for parents and families of the LGBTQ community, and they have tons of information on whether your family member is lesbian or gay or pansexual or transgender. So it's a great resource to get information. So again, find reliable sources of information. If you're doing a web search and it's talking about how horrible trans people are, you're in the wrong place. Right. By and large, we're quite lovely people that just are trying to get through our day. So don't force us to answer your questions, just as you would with any marginalized community. And I think also it's one thing for you to ask me here on this podcast where I've given you consent to ask me any question. Follow our lead in terms of our pronouns. Try to look at how we're dressed and how we're presenting instead of maybe the shape of our face. That's going to give you a lot of clues, right? And I know it can be hard to get past, well, that person looks male, so I should use sir. If I'm wearing a dress, there is no way in which you should use sir. Right? So again, I think it's just being curious in the right way, educating yourself, being open to the fact that gender is not binary, right? And we see this through quite a few cultures in the modern world, but particularly in older periods of time, right? When we take a look at Native American, some tribes recognize as many as 6 genders, right? And we see this in a lot of cultures across the world. Like, this is not a new concept. What's new is the age of the internet. to make it something everybody can see. It has always been here. Trans people have been around, as has lesbian and gay people, since the beginning of people being people.
No, appreciate you highlighting those, as well as a reminder that unless we intentionally seek the right resources, we're not going to tap into it. And folks, you know the drill. I always add all these resources our guests share in our blog. So come find us at curiousmonica.com. If you ever lose or have a question, just send a direct message to me or Erica, but send to me so that way I can revert. So that way we can filter and make sure that Erica gets the question that is more intentional. And I appreciate you kind of holding us accountable. What are the ways and languages that we can use to be more supportive, as well as for those out there who's looking for that hope, whether as a parent or as an individual going through that transition, to know that what they can do. I want to revisit now back to your professional chapters, because now what connecting the two, what you're sharing is that you've had the courage to make all these adaptation and transformation professionally, despite you feeling stuck inside personally. I'm curious, what helped you still find the courage to do all of that? Because now you're probably thriving even more.
Oh yeah,
because there's no box that's limiting you. But like, what helped you? Because I bet there's folks out there, whether it's because of the box they feel being, a minority, to your point, whether it's trans, whatever that box is, we all at times feel limited and feel like, I want to continue to have the courage to do. And you've somehow done that throughout your life, now doing even more. But when you look back even more, so what helped you? Because you didn't get to open that fully even personally. So I'm curious, what helped you?
I think for me, it does really come down to my sort of view on life, right? And you'll find this is different with trans people, but throughout my life, I've always been able to evaluate a situation and pick out what's working and what's not working. I think that's one of my better skills, is like, hey, this doesn't quite fit. Like it really makes sense when we talk about design or product management, right? My job is to say, that's not quite the best thing to put forward for you, but maybe this fits you better, or this serves our customers better. So having that ability to sort of self-analyze, to self-audit, I noticed with self-observation that I was overcoming things all of the time, right? And what I decided in the end was that taking a risk on my gut intuition being right is far better than not trusting my intuition. I can repair a situation that doesn't go well. I can apologize. I can make amends. I can change my behavior. I can't do anything about an opportunity I did not take.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Right? And so my point of view has always been, you've seen yourself overcome so many things.
Yeah.
Does it matter if it goes wrong? You will learn something. What if it goes right? And I think there are certainly some people in the community that see themselves that way. I think also for some people, it comes down to, I've tried everything else and this is the only thing left to try. If this doesn't work, I don't know what to do. And it becomes that choice of last resort that gets them going. But once they inhabit themselves, they find that they start to believe in themselves and they start to thrive and they start to flourish. Just as if you inhabit what you want to be in your job and your career, it starts to go well, right? When you are in a role that doesn't fit you or forces you to put your best skills to the side, you don't do well, right? So the more we learn to believe in ourselves, the more we're going to thrive and do well. And that's certainly true for trans people. Now, as a marginalized community, we have to remember that there are obstacles in our way, intentionally put in our path. It can be hard to thrive. I have to admit that I've been lucky. Look, I'm a white trans lady that lives in a liberal city that works in technology. I have means, I have access, and my whiteness makes my life easier. It's not true for everybody. But there's also a certain amount of luck. Just like you have that in your career, things just sort of have to align sometimes. And I think for trans people, we have to keep working on it. We have to keep trying new things until we find what works for us. And for some, that can be quite difficult. You might not have the means to move to the right city. You might not have access to a trans clinic. You might not have role models that live near you that can meet. Keep looking, keep finding people online, keep talking to them, keep building your community, because that's going to pump you up and make you feel like you're not alone.
I appreciate these wisdoms of reminders and how we can make sure we continue to go forward. As you said, keep showing up, keep seeking. Can't believe how fast time has flown by.
I know, it's so fast.
I feel like we're just getting started, but thank you so much. I know many who tune in would be inspired and be empowered by your story sharing and your journey.
Yeah.
A few more things to dive into. One that I've loved asking my guests to continue our education and learning is asking our guests to introduce us to at least maybe 1 or 3 more innovators that they know, that they are inspired by, who happens to be from this background. And so in our month of Pride, we've been asking our guests if you could introduce at least 3 innovators to us who happen to be who's an innovator who happen to be LGBTQ, who are at least 3 names you want to shout out.
Okay, this is easy for me. First one, Emily Schilling, right? She's a trans woman like me. She is the highest ranking out trans woman in the military, right? And she is the president of Sparta, the trans military organization. And actually, she just was named to like Curb's 50 most powerful women's list this year.
Amazing.
So she's a great follow, but she's a naval aviator. She is the first trans woman to gain her flight status back after transition.
Wow.
So Emily Schilling is a great follow. Leo Caldwell is a professor at Ball State who's a trans man who not only is educating his kids on journalism in college, but is part of a trans organization called Right that is working to make gender-affirming care an FDA-approved process, which will make it easy for everybody to access it, those that need it, right? A third one would be, I would say, Max Siegel. He's a trans man. He's actually in London. He's quite famous. His transition has gone very well. He's very handsome, by the way. And he is out there, one of the driving forces for trans people in the UK in terms of representation and showing up and being seen. He's a constant public speaker. So those are some great ones. Also, I'll give you a third one. Chase Strangio is a huge advocate for trans people, and you'll frequently see Chase speaking with the Human Rights Campaign.
Love it. Love it. Folks, you know the notes. We will add these for people that she has shared with us in the blog. Find the resources. We're going to do a shout out to continue to learn and educate ourselves and revisit these stories. Erica, you shared so many different wisdom. What's a final wisdom you want to share if there are innovators out there, no matter where they are in their journey?
Take the risk. Take the risk. It may not pay off today, but learning to take risks and getting comfortable with that will pay off in the end. If you're wondering whether you should do the thing, if you should write the book, I wrote a book, if you should change the job, if you should transition, if you should come out, whatever it is, if you're dwelling on it and you're thinking on it, you're looping on that, just do it.
And the final question is, what's the best way folks can stay in touch with you, Erica?
You can find me on, I have a website, oherica.com, where you can get my information. You get information on the upcoming book. It'll be out, we think, early 2025. It's called Advice from Your Trans Auntie. I'm your trans auntie. And you can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn, Erica M. Vogel. And you can find me on Instagram, erica.verica. And I'll give you all that information.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Erica, for joining us. And thank you all for tuning in for another conversation. We'll be back again next week as we continue our learning of different innovators around the world. So we'll see you soon. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Erica, so much for inspiring us. Your resilience, fearlessness, and authenticity and inviting voice is felt throughout. I hope that you all enjoyed our conversation today. And thank you all for continuing our conversation of learning about innovators around the world of different environments. This has been a wonderful Pride Month celebration that we had with all of you. If you missed any of the conversations, feel free to check back any of their past episodes and revisit our wonderful guests who've shared their stories with us. Next week, we are starting a new month, July. July is Pride Disability Month. And so we're excited to continue our learning of innovators. And in this time, learning about innovators who happen to have a disability or working in the disability accessibility space. Curious to learn more? Join me next week and we'll continue on our learning and growing together. This is your host, Monica King, founder and CEO of Innovators Box, and you have been listening to Curious Monica. Have a wonderful day and continue to be courageous, creative, and curious. I'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning into today's episode. Your support means the world to us, so we're so glad you're here. Want to do a little shout out for those in the team who made this possible. Thank you to everyone at Innovators Box Studios. Audio engineering and production is done by
Sam Lamert.
Audio engineering assistance by
Ravi Ladd.
Website and marketing support by
Cree Pandey.
Graphic support by
Leah Orsini.
Christine Eribal.
Original music by Innovators Box Studios, and executive producing, directing, writing, researching, and hosting by me, Monica King, founder and CEO of Innovators Box. Thank you for continuing on the journey of how to build a better workplace and thrive with creativity. Visit us at innovatorsbox.com and get some free resources at innovatorsbox.com/free. We look forward to seeing you at the next episode. Thank you and have a wonderful day.